Hi there. In today's video, I'll explore a potential method of hardening a radio that does not have an ingress protection rating. In case you're wondering what an ingress protection rating is, it's an international standard used to determine the degree of protection or sealing effectiveness in electrical enclosures against intrusion of objects, water, dust, or accidental contact. The plan is to apply hot glue to the circuit board of this Bofang UV5R. I'm not sure if this is going to work or not, and I'm a little hesitant to do this video because I'm not convinced how practical of an idea this is. For context, the origin of this idea began after I did a couple of stress test videos that included the UV5R. And in those videos, I wanted to see how the UV5R, which, as I mentioned, doesn't have an ingress protection rating, would stack up against other radios that were IP rated. The stress tests included water, snow, sand, a drop test, and being shot with a 12 gauge using number 8 shot. Both UV5Rs I tested still worked at the end of those respective trials, and they were able to transmit and receive despite the abuse they were subjected to. So why use hot glue? Well, a subscriber to this channel, as well as a couple other folks in the PCG Telegram chat, brought up how hot glue is sometimes used in electronics as a means of protecting solder joints. It's also used as an insulator as well as sticking down parts when making prototypes. And I have an example of a piece of electronics that has hot glue on the circuit board. And let me switch cameras so I can show you what I mean. I have an extra LDG tuner here, and I've removed the cover so you could see the circuit board, and hopefully you can see this, but on the side here as well as along the top you can see that hot glue was used during the manufacture of this tuner. So since hot glue is used in other electronics, a question was posed: could this method be used in a handheld transceiver? While I have my doubts about the effectiveness of this experiment, it's an interesting concept. I think all that I'll likely accomplish out of this is ruining a perfectly good UV5R. I've taken other UV5Rs apart before, and I know that space is tight, and that's going to be a problem when putting it back together. The layer of hot glue is going to have to be as thin as I can get it, and that's going to be a challenge. Even if I manage to apply a thin enough layer and assemble it without any issues, there's no guarantee it's going to last any longer while submersed than the UV5Rs in the previous stress tests. I don't believe this method will 100% waterproof the radio, as water will eventually seep in depending on how long the radio is submersed and at what depth. But maybe the hot glue will make the circuit board somewhat water resistant and keep critical parts from oxidizing in case it's exposed to water. While researching this topic, I discovered another product which is called potting compound, and that's also used for electronics for filling and sealing cavities in electronic assemblies. But for this video, I'm not going to use potting compound because I wanted to try and answer the question if hot glue sticks are a practical application for use in a handheld transceiver. After looking at several glue stick brands, I realized there are some formulations that may be corrosive to electronics, and the glue I'm using, it's advertised as multi-purpose, including use on circuit boards. So we'll see how that goes. So will the application of glue have the same effectiveness as radios on the market touting ingress protection? And I don't believe so, because radios with IP ratings for dust and water like this Yaesu VX6, they have seals in the radio to help mitigate the risk of water and dust damaging the circuit board. And those seals are much more effective than what I'm about to attempt. As an example, this VX6, it's advertised as being able to be submersed in 3 feet of water for approximately 30 minutes. So after I hot glue the circuit board, for good measure, I'm going to Scotch guard the speaker. And after that, I'll put the radio back together, turn it on, and submerge it in a bowl of water. I'll be observing to determine if the hot glue appears to have any effectiveness in keeping the radio running while submersed. In the previous test, when I put the UV 5Rs in water, they shorted out within a minute or two. My thinking is once this radio is submersed, the battery's likely going to short out because that's what happened in previous stress tests. Also, I don't really have a good way of sealing this battery compartment. And these batteries, they're not totally sealed, which is something I learned in those previous tests. I'll leave the radio in the water until it goes dark, and after I remove it from the bowl, I'll put a fresh battery in case the one that was exposed to water shorts out, and I'll see if the radio powers up right away. In the previous tests, when I submersed the UV 5Rs, they did not power up right away and took some time to dry out. So we'll give it a shot. And when I come back, I'll have the radio disassembled and I'll just kind of do a very brief, high-level overview of the disassembly. Okay, I've taken the radio apart and I'll just briefly walk through what those steps were. I removed the battery. The belt clip removes with these two screws. I unscrewed the antenna, pulled the volume knob off, and when you pull the antenna and volume knob off, you'll see a couple of rings at the top of the case. And you can just use a very small flathead bit to remove those. There's little notches on these rings, and if you put the bit in between those notches and push the ring, they'll unscrew pretty easily. On the back of the radio, there's a little bezel at the top, and it has a little clip that retains the battery. When you take these apart, just be careful that you don't lose this little spring. There's a couple of screws here that hold the bezel. These two screws are on the back of the radio, and those are what hold the bottom of the circuit board to the case. And once you get this disassembled, the little rubber keypad here just peels right off. One thing you do want to take note of is if you end up pulling one of these apart for one reason or the other, you kind of have to wiggle the circuit board out of the case, and you just want to be very careful that you don't pull the speaker wires off of the circuit board, because otherwise you're going to have to solder those back on if you get kind of overzealous and pull this circuit board out too quickly. So I'm going to begin hot gluing this thing, and I'm going to try and apply as thin of a layer of hot glue on this as I can. I do need to be careful though, because these little buttons, I don't want to really cover those, I don't think, because that might interfere with the operation of the keypad. So I'll have to be careful around those, and hopefully at the end of this I've applied such a thin enough layer that I can fit this circuit board back into the case without any issues. And if that's successful, then we'll let the hot glue cure, and then I'll put it in the water for the test. I've managed to apply a thin enough layer of glue to the circuit board to fit it back into the case and tighten everything down without any issues. And after I put the radio back together, I turned it on and I was able to transmit and receive, and all the buttons work, and I can confirm that it functions as it did before I took it apart. So I'll turn it on, and what I'm going to do is put it in the water, and I'm going to time it just to see how long it lasts. Again, I think what's going to happen is the battery is going to short out, because that's what happened in the previous stress test videos that I did that included this model radio. And so I'll time it to see how long it takes to short out, and once it does, then I'll pull it out of the water, and I have a fresh battery here ready to go, and I just want to see if it powers up right away. In the previous videos, the radios didn't power up right away, and so I had to let those dry out. So we'll give it a shot. So here we go. And I do see some bubbles coming out. And let's see if it's still on. It shorted out after just a few seconds there. So it didn't take long for this battery to short out. So I'll turn it off, pull the radio out, or the battery out rather. And it does turn on. Look at that. So it did power up right away. Our light at the top came on. Let's see if we can turn that off. Nope, doesn't look like it, but we'll put this back in and see if there's any difference. And I can see water filling up inside the case, and it's starting to go dark. This one's actually lasting a little bit longer than the last one. We're at 20 seconds now. And it looks like the display's starting to come back a little bit. So I'm just going to leave this in here and we'll see how long it goes. So one of the things about these batteries, and this is probably why this one's lasting a little bit longer, is they're not 100% sealed. So some of them are a little leakier than the others, I think. But this one seems to have a little bit better seal on it because the radio is still going, and we're at 1 minute and 10 seconds so far. And it's still going. I'm actually pretty surprised. I thought this radio was going to short out pretty quickly. So I guess the hot glue is actually keeping it going. So we're at minute 40. Surprisingly, this method seems to have actually made the radio somewhat water resistant. I'm pretty surprised. I was fairly skeptical about even doing this test. I don't see a lot of water bubbles coming out. There are some around the, I don't even know if you can see it, but around the face of the radio where the speaker is, and just on the sides as well. But it's still going. Now, I don't know if this thing's going to work when I pull it out of the water. That's going to be another test entirely, but still at 2 minutes and 36 seconds. I'm going to let this continue to run, and I'm not going to bore the audience with sitting here and watching the timer go, but I will, well, is it going to, actually something's happening. So I'm starting to see a little bit of distortion to the display. I was going to turn the camera off and come back in a few minutes and see if it's still going and determine at what point it died, but it's still going. It looks like the part of the display is starting to malfunction a little bit. And we're currently at 3 minutes 44 seconds, which isn't too bad for hot glue on a circuit board in a Bofeng UV5R. All right, I'm going to let this run, and when I come back, I'll let you know when it died and how, basically how long it lasted. So that'll run, and hopefully I'll see you back in a few minutes. Just a brief check-in. So I'm at 12 minutes and 40 seconds, and it's still going. And the only thing that's really happened is the light on top has dimmed a little bit, but that's about it. So I'll let this continue to run and check in periodically. Okay, I'm at 15 minutes or just a little bit over, and the display just went out, and the light on top is the only thing going, so I'm actually going to call it. And I'll pull the radio out, and I'm actually going to put in a fresh battery in a moment and see if it powers up, but I have to go grab one real quickly. So when I come back, I'll put a new battery in and see if it powers up. Okay, I've got a fresh battery, and I'm just going to pop that in and see if the radio turns on, and it doesn't look like it. I don't see anything on the display coming up. It looks like the water finally got to it. So, but that was surprisingly more successful than I thought it was going to be, and I didn't think that the hot glue would hold up that long and allow the radio to function underwater as long as it did. And I don't know that I would recommend people, open up their Bofings and start hot gluing them or anything, but it was kind of an interesting experiment. And anyway, that's all for now, and I hope that you enjoyed this video.